Hey guys, it's the Villaman here, home theater enthusiast and lover of all things tech. Now, I get to review a lot of TVs each year, and one of the most requested videos I make is a comparison between the LG OLED and Samsung QLED for the year, and here we are. Now, in previous years, it has been a simple straight-up comparison where I would compare the LG C series to the Samsung Q90 series, but for 2020, it's a bit different. Now, the LG OLED has remained the same, as in very much the same, while the Samsung QLED, they've made some changes to their high-end TVs, where the high-end TVs are, instead of being 4K, are actually 8K. So the top of the line are the 800T and the Q900T. So since it makes sense to compare similarly priced TVs, I'll be comparing the LG C10 OLED to the Samsung Q800T QLED TV, which is an 8K set, as I mentioned. But before we even get into the video, if you're new here or you're not new but haven't subscribed yet, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and come along for the ride, because who knows, maybe I'll get to 100K subscribers before 2025. So like all my videos, I'll be filming this in 4K HDR, so you can watch it in HDR on your newer iPhone or Android devices or your 4K HDR TVs, of course. And I suggest you do it that way because then you'll be able to see a lot more of the highlight and shadow detail that will be in the video. So to facilitate this comparison, I'll be using the Panasonic UB820 Blu-ray player and also my Denon receiver to split that signal to both TVs, so each TV will get the exact same signal. The TVs will be in their most accurate picture mode, so for the OLED that will be filmmaker mode, while for the QLED it will be the movie mode. Now this is not the only comparison I'll be doing with these TVs. I'll also be doing the gaming comparison so we can see how they behave with some high frame rate, high intensity gaming, so stick around for that. And if you haven't seen my 2019 comparison, then make sure to check that out in the video linked up there. Now, we'll be comparing several aspects of the picture of these TVs, but I think I've had you wait long enough. Let's get into it. Now, first up, we'll be doing some tests with the Spears & Munsell 4K benchmark disc. Now, this disc is great for testing and calibrating your 4K HDR TV, and we'll be using it for a bunch of these tests. The output of the disc is set to 2000 nits, so the TVs will have to tone map any scene brighter than what the TV supports natively. In this first test, we can see where both TVs have some difficulty reproducing the brightest sections of the test, where the two last sections appear to be one. There is no differentiation between the zones. In the star field test, which is pretty difficult for an LCD TV, we can see where the points are much brighter on the OLED. I've seen in the past where some LCD TVs, the backlight would flash as a result of it being so challenging, but the Q800 handles this scene well, if we don't mind the lack of brightness in the points. Next up is this checkerboard pattern, which we'll use to test to see how aggressive the local dimming algorithm is on the QLED. And the more aggressive the local dimming algorithm is, the more vignetting we'll see on the edges of the white squares. And in this case, we see just a bit, which indicates some aggression in the local dimming algorithm, but it's actually not that bad. Next up, we'll use this quantization test to see how the TV handles 8-bit and 10-bit gradients to see if there's any banding in them. And while both TVs have banding in the 8-bit version, the 10-bit version is much smoother, but is smoother overall on the QLED. A bright object on a dark background is pretty challenging for an LCD TV, and it's no different in this test. And we can see some blooming around the peppers on the QLED. You won't see blooming on an OLED TV because each individual pixel can be turned on and off as needed. In this next motion interpolation test, we can see where both TVs handle 24 frames per second content very well. In this next fast motion smoothing test, both TVs have their de-judder and de-blur settings at their maximum, and while both of them smooth out the image, the LG has significantly more artifacting, as you can see on the squares at the top of the screen. Having these settings enabled would be great for fast moving content like sports, of course. Some people like to use it for regular TV watching, but I just can't agree with that. This is how it looks with those settings disabled. Alright, now let's get on to the good stuff, the actual HDR video comparison. Looking at both of these TVs together, it's clear that their pictures are very comparable in certain respects. They're both at their maximum brightness and they have excellent color rendition and contrast performance, but the OLED will of course edge out the QLED in contrast performance because of the inherent benefits of the technology. But this QLED's advantage in peak brightness isn't as pronounced as it has been in previous years. Now let's take a closer look. Colors on both TVs are vivid and has that HDR pop, but doesn't get to the realm of oversaturation. Though in some instances the OLED has higher perceived saturation because of the higher contrast. There's more details in the shadows of the QLED than there is in the OLED, but that's been a going trend for the past few years. So from everything I've seen, I'd say the QLED handles details in the near black scenes a bit better than the OLED does. Machine learning algorithms are becoming increasingly important so that TVs can upscale lower quality content to their native resolution, especially among Samsung and LG. And in this test, we'll be comparing a 4K and a 720p version of the same clip to see what the differences are. First, looking at the C10 OLED, the TV does an incredible job with its AI upscaling to upscale the 720p version of the video to the native 4K of the panel. There is a bit of softness that you can see in person, but it still looks really good. In fact, in this comparison, if you didn't see where the video split sometimes in the middle, you wouldn't actually know it was a comparison. But in person, you can see some softness in the 720p version, but as I said, it is very impressive nonetheless. If we look at the same comparison with the Samsung, you can see as it upscales a video, there's a difference in the contrast represented in each video. That said, the video still has an incredible amount of detail and it's actually hard to differentiate the 720p versus the 4K version. Though much like the OLED, there is some softness, especially in the finer details, but again, it is still very impressive. If we compare both TVs, then we can see where the QLED tends to make darker scenes actually darker and brighter scenes brighter, while the OLED exhibits more obvious signs of picture sharpening. In this off-axis viewing test, we can see where the QLED suffers from some color shifting, contrast, and brightness loss. The OLED also suffers from some slight brightness loss when viewed off-axis. Interesting, right? Now this certainly isn't the brightest QLED that Samsung has made, which would explain why it was so close in brightness in certain scenes to the OLED TV. But beyond that, I was pretty impressed with the color rendition and the contrast performance of the Samsung. It's more akin to the 2018 QLED than it is to the 2019 QLED. As far as the picture goes, the Samsung is of course the ambient light rejecting king, like Shaq at the basket. Not only because of its peak brightness performance, but also the anti-reflective coating that the screen is coated with. While for the C10, since it's an OLED, it has some of the best picture available that you can get right now. Now that certainly hasn't changed, but each of these TVs have their respective merits and demerits. So it's not just a matter of how the picture looks, it's a matter of the features that fit your need. Now, one big issue with Samsung TVs is that they don't support the proprietary Dolby Vision standard of HDR when most other manufacturers support it. So instead you'll have to stick with HDR10 Plus, which is another version of HDR with dynamic metadata similar to Dolby Vision. But HDR10 Plus is an open standard version based on HDR10, while Dolby Vision is proprietary to Dolby. So both TVs support HDR10 and HLG hybrid log gamma HDR standards, but they each respectively support HDR10 Plus in Samsung's corner and Dolby Vision in LG's corner. Now Dolby Vision has a much wider support, but there are movies available in HDR10 Plus also. I actually did a comparison on how HDR10 Plus compares to Dolby Vision, and you can check it out in the card up there. But other key features of these 2020 model TVs is HDMI 2.1 support going forward for the next gen consoles, the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. Now, the Q800T has only one HDMI 2.1 port, while the C10 has 4 of them. Now, the HDMI 2.1 ports on the C10 have about 20% less bandwidth than the specs for HDMI 2.1 dictate, but the question is, will that have any real-world impact? Well, so far, none yet, but in the future, TBD. But that means going forward that if you have multiple HDMI 2.1 devices, then you'll have to use a receiver to connect them to your Samsung TV, unless you want to switch HDMI ports every time you have to use them, which is very inconvenient. Come on, Samsung. While on the C10, you have a glut of HDMI 2.1 ports, so you can plug your devices into whichever port you like. There's also the question of the benefit of 8K versus 4K, but I don't think that 8K is necessarily a requirement for a screen that's 65 inches or smaller. At that size, 4K provides more than enough detail, and even with these two TVs in my room, I struggle to see the benefit that 8K provides on a 65-inch TV, but that may change as the screen size gets bigger, but what I have is a 65-inch, so that's my conclusion. The screen on the LG is not as good for a bright room or one with a lot of ambient lighting as the Samsung is. Though the TV gets plenty bright, it just doesn't have the anti-reflective quality or the anti-reflective coating that the Samsung has, and as a result there are a lot of reflections, as you saw in the screen test if you've seen that video. But I hope this video has provided you at least some insight and help you at least somewhat in making your final decision on which TV is better for you. Let me know in the comments what you think about these TVs and about the comparison in general, what I can change to improve it or what you'd like to see. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it or found it helpful, and subscribe for more TV and home theater content. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood Villaman saying, be safe and peace.